Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I'm happy to rise today and support the bill that has been put forward in the House of Commons by my colleague, the member for Coast of Bays, Central, Notre Dame, which is in essence central coastal Newfoundland, Madam Chair. This is an important bill for all of us who have lived a traditional life, both commercially and non-commercially, around the sealing industry. The people in my riding of Labrador, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, have engaged in the seal industry for centuries. Throughout my family, right on back to my great-great-grandfather's day, the seal was a very important part of survival, both from a cultural perspective and from an earning value perspective for the family. It's a way of life for us still today, as we eat seal and we wear seal. Madam Speaker, we feel that the federal government do have an obligation to protect and support Canadian heritage activities, whether that be farming or fishing, and in this case with seal harvesting. And we're asking that members of the House of Commons would support that position. Bill C-208 is just one way for the federal government to stand by its commitment to Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people and to those whose economies are affiliated with the seal industry. While foreign governments and well-funded activist groups from away and at home in Canada have dealt a significant blow to this industry over the years and created a terrible image of the Canadian seal harvest, we have an obligation to ensure that we make things right and that we point out the unfair publicity that have surrounded the industry. It has been over 30 years since regulations have started to change within the seal industry. The images today of white coats and baby seals are still used by those who are trying to make the cash grab on the backs of those in the industry. But it's over 30 years since that has ever occurred in the sealing industry of Canada. It is one of the most humane industries that you could ever partake in. And the people that perpetuate a different image are indeed, as my colleague says, fraud in their intentions and fraud in their information. Today, what's happening in the industry and their negative propaganda has done harm. It has done harm to the Inuit people who have depended upon this food for security, food security in their communities, and it has done harm to rural and coastal communities of Canada. Madam Chair, for Labradorians and for Inuit all over Canada, the seal harvest is so much a part of our lives. It is the cultural core of who we are as people, and it is the mainstay of our diet. It's really hard to explain to Canadians who have not been a part of the North Shore of Quebec and the Magdalen Islands cultural industry, or that of Nunavut, or that of Nunavik, or that of Labrador, or that of coastal Newfoundland, Madam Chair. It's really hard to explain what it means from a cultural and industry perspective, but I'm going to attempt to do that. And I'm going to attempt to do it through my own story as one person. I grew up in a small, remote, rural community, predominantly Indigenous Inuit people. When I grew up in the community, our clothes back then was all of seal, and it was all hand-sewn and handmade by my mother, my grandmothers, my aunts, and it was done from the seals that my dad and my grandfather would catch. And not only was it the main source of food and protein for our family, but it was a main source of clothing as well. And still today, we continue in that vein, despite the negative publicity towards us. We are not a society of people that judges others based on their culture. We do not judge them based on what they eat or what their cultural practices are, and nor should they judge us as northern and coastal people. What we do know, Madam Chair, is that the seal industry, more so than being a cultural and significant industry to the people of the north and coastal regions in Canada, it is also a species upon which is impacting the entire fisheries ecosystem in Atlantic Canada. And for those to ignore the impact of the seal upon other species is really just blinding themselves in a cloud where they do not want to be peeping out at the real story. The real story is that in coastal areas like in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have seen the seal population growing at a rapid rate. Because we are no longer harvesting at the levels that we once did, because the commercial industry has been eroded, because the international markets have been buying in to the fraud, negative propaganda of money-grabbing socialite groups. Because of those things, Madam Chair, our whole ecosystem is out of balance. And you will hear it from those that work in the fishing industry. They're seeing the huge depopulation of capelin and of cod. I live in a community where a river runs through my community, where I fish salmon on a rod from the rock just down the lane from my house. And when I can look out and see seals in that river, it's something that my grandfather never saw, because the animals are starving. They're looking for a food supply and they're starving. And they're going wherever they can go to find that food. They become overpopulated. They have become a huge predator to every other fish species in the ocean. Seals today are eating more fish in the Atlantic waters around the coastal communities and the ridings like I represent than any fishery could take in 10 years based on the quota levels that we currently have. So, Madam Speaker, the seal industry is important in many ways. It's important to the people who live there and have culturally used this animal for survival and continues to do so today as a main source of food and clothing. It is important to the ecosystem of the fisheries habitat upon which we continue to harvest to ensure that that balance is there and that communities are able to have sustainable fisheries, boat in seal, boat in cod, boat in salmon, boat in shrimp, boat in crab, boat in capelin, because right now the seal is overpopulated and has become a predator to every other species. It's not uncommon that any of us in those communities would get emails and photos from fishermen who is just cleaning a seal to open it up to find a whole stomach is filled with baby crab in areas where the crab population is declining at huge rates year over year. However, Madam Speaker, we do want to, through this bill, we do want to point out the importance of seal products in Canada and in all of our communities, and what that means to supplementing the income as well of people who live there. When you look at traditional crafts from northern and Arctic regions, especially in Nunavut, and I think my colleague from Nunavut spoke on this bill just a couple of weeks ago in the House of Commons, you will see the tremendous dependency upon seal products to be able to run small businesses, to earn a living, and to build on their own investment in those communities. It has been a way of life for them as any other species. Harvesting, farming, fishing has been a way of life for anyone else in this country. We feel that this bill is consistent with our commitment to renewing our relationship with Indigenous people who depend upon this industry, as I have just outlined. And I would like to remind everyone in this House and anyone who will listen, that Canada's seal harvest is one of the most humane industries. It is well regulated and it is sustainable, and it is, Madam Chair, overly abundantly healthy in Canada. There is absolutely no doubt about that. So I just want to ensure to all my colleagues here the importance of supporting this bill, the importance of marking this seal as a product and seal as an industry for Canadians that have depended upon it traditionally for many years. Thank you.